My father-in-law handed me a sealed envelope with a sinister smile and said, "Welcome to the family, my dear. Don't worry, your replacement has already been chosen." I stood there in the middle of our lavish one-year anniversary party, the champagne flute freezing in my hand. The noise of the crowd, a sea of his family's powerful friends and associates, faded into a dull roar. This wasn't the romantic surprise I had imagined Nate, my husband of exactly 365 days, had planned. This was something else entirely, something dark and premeditated. My name is Lena, I'm 24, and my life had felt like a fairy tale until that moment. I met Nate Carlisle, 25, during our final year at university. He was the handsome, charismatic heir to a vast family empire, and I was the scholarship student from a solidly middle-class family, both my parents dedicated healthcare administrators. Our connection was instant and intense, a whirlwind of late-night conversations, shared dreams, and a love that felt destined. When he proposed after a year of dating, under a blanket of stars on a private beach, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. His family, the Carlisles, had welcomed me with an open, if slightly formal, arms. Richard, his father, was a titan of industry, an architect who had built his firm into a regional powerhouse. He was a man of few words, but his approval felt like a tangible reward. Caroline, his mother, was the epitome of old money elegance, her life a curated collection of charity galas, garden parties, and impeccable taste. She took me under her wing, teaching me about art and etiquette with a patient, if sometimes condescending, air. Vanessa, Nate's 29-year-old sister, was initially the warmest, a bubbly and sometimes self-absorbed confidant who seemed genuinely thrilled that her brother had found someone who made him so happy. Their world was one of staggering wealth and unshakable social standing. Their home wasn't just a house, it was a statement. My family's comfortable but modest life seemed almost quaint in comparison. I sometimes felt like an imposter, a sparrow who had flown into a gilded aviary, but Nate's love was my anchor. He made me feel like I belonged, like I was his equal in every way that truly mattered. The first fissures in this perfect reality appeared about 6 months into our marriage. Nate started becoming distant. The man who used to text me silly memes throughout the day now replied with monosyllabic answers. He began working late with a frequency that felt excessive, even for a man being groomed to take over his father's company. He'd come home long after I'd fallen asleep, smelling of expensive whiskey and a cologne that wasn't the one I'd bought him for his birthday. When I tried to bridge the growing gap between us, he'd shut down. "It's just stress, Lena. Father is piling a lot on me with this new merger. It's confidential, I can't talk about it." His excuses were smooth, rehearsed. But the light in his eyes when he looked at me had dimmed. Our lovemaking became infrequent and felt rushed, a marital duty rather than an act of passion. I started finding little clues: a receipt for a boutique hotel downtown, a matchbook from an exclusive restaurant I knew we'd never been to together, a long blonde hair on the collar of his coat that was distinctly not mine. The anxiety became a constant, gnawing companion. I felt myself turning into a cliché, a paranoid wife searching her husband's pockets for evidence of betrayal. I was ashamed of my suspicions, but I couldn't quiet the voice in my head that screamed something was terribly wrong. The catalyst came on a rainy Tuesday. Caroline had asked me to help her organize the annual Carlisle Foundation Charity Gala, a massive undertaking. I was in their home office, surrounded by seating charts and donor lists, when Richard came in. He needed a specific set of architectural blueprints from his personal safe for a meeting the next day. His hands were full with a conference call, so he rattled off the combination, a gesture of trust that, at the time, felt significant. "Be a dear and fetch them for me, Lena. The safe is behind the Monet print." My heart hammered against my ribs as I spun the dial. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, among neat stacks of bonds, property deeds, and velvet jewelry boxes, my eyes fell on a plain, unlabeled black USB drive. It was tucked away in a corner, almost hidden. A compulsion, a gut-deep, terrifying dread, overrode every principle I had. I slipped it into my pocket, the cold plastic feeling like a brand against my skin. I handed Richard the blueprints, my smile feeling brittle and false. That night, alone in my home office while Nate was again working late, I inserted the drive into my laptop. What I discovered there didn't just shatter my marriage. It dismantled my entire understanding of reality. It was a meticulously compiled digital dossier. On me. There were deep background checks on my parents, delving into their financial history, their medical records, even a psychological profile of my mother based on her volunteer work. There were my university transcripts, notes from professors I'd never met, and hundreds of photos of me from years before I met Nate, taken with a long lens as I walked to class, met friends for coffee, visited my family. This was violation enough. But the most chilling part was a folder labeled Project Ascension. It contained emails, encrypted chat logs, and a formal contract. The contract was between Richard Carlisle and Nathaniel Carlisle Jr., dated 3 months before Nate had even proposed to me. In cold, precise legal language, it outlined a matrimonial and progeny arrangement. Nate was to court and marry me within a 12-month period. The clause that made my blood run cold stated that upon the successful birth of a legitimate, biologically confirmed heir, a phrase that was boldly underlined, Nate would receive his full inheritance and a controlling stake in the family business. The attached emails revealed the grotesque reason for this mandate. The Carlisle fortune, it turned out, was not the product of generations of aristocratic privilege. Richard's grandfather had built his initial capital through ruthless, often illegal means, union-busting, shady land deals, and even suspected ties to organized crime. A long-buried clause in the original family trust, drafted by a paranoid patriarch, stipulated that to secure the fortune for another generation and distance it from its sordid past, the primary heir must produce an heir with a spouse who possessed unimpeachable genetic, academic, and social credentials. They needed a woman from a clean, respectable, middle-class background, with a history of academic excellence and no trace of scandal or undesirable lineage. I was quite literally a breeding stock chosen to launder their dirty legacy and secure their bloodline. My middle-class normality was the key that unlocked their future. Nate? The chats were with a woman named Isabel, a fiery, artistic soul from his past whom he had never stopped loving. Their messages were filled with his agonizing guilt and her heartbroken pleas. "I'm doing my duty, Isabel," one of his messages read. "It's the only way. Once the heir is secured, we can be together. Father has promised." Her replies were desperate. "How long, Nate? How long do you have to play house with this stranger? I can't stand the thought of you touching her." The world dissolved into a nauseating blur. My marriage was a business transaction. My husband's love was a performance, his touch a calculation. Every compliment from Caroline, every giggling shopping trip with Vanessa, every word of approval from Richard, it was all a lie. They weren't welcoming me into a family. They were acquiring a component for their legacy. The nausea was so intense I stumbled to the bathroom and vomited, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down my face. The confrontation with Nate the next morning was brutal. I didn't scream or cry. I just placed the USB drive on the kitchen counter between us and said, "Explain this." The color drained from his face, leaving a ghastly pallor. He didn't try to deny it. He collapsed into a chair, his broad shoulders slumping in defeat, and confessed everything. He confessed the immense lifelong pressure from his father, The threat of being not just disinherited but utterly destroyed, his name ruined if he didn't comply. He confessed his ongoing affair with Isabel. He even claimed, with a pathetic desperation, that he had developed genuine feelings for me, that the line between duty and love had become blurred. But his words were ashes in my mouth. The foundation of our life together was rotten to the core. The fallout was nuclear. I packed a bag and moved out that same day, finding refuge with an understanding friend from university. When Richard and Caroline discovered the breach, their fury was terrifying. It wasn't directed at their son for his infidelity, or at themselves for their grotesque scheme, but at me for uncovering it. The mask of civility shattered completely. Caroline called me, her voice a whip of cold contempt. "You foolish, ungrateful girl. After everything we did for you. We lifted you out of your mundane little life. You were supposed to be discreet, to play your part. This was bigger than your childish notions of love." Vanessa bombarded my phone with venomous texts. "I knew you were a grasping little gold digger. You couldn't handle the truth, could you? This is how powerful families survive. You were a means to an end, and you should have been flattered." Then came Richard's final move. He summoned me to his office, a room designed to intimidate. He didn't shout. His voice was quiet, lethally calm. "Lena," he said, steepling his fingers, "if you ever breathe a word of this to anyone, the press, your simple parents, anyone, I will destroy you. I will bury your parents in litigation until they lose their home. I will make sure you never work in this city again. Your future will be ashes. Sign this." He slid a document across the vast mahogany desk. "And this all goes away. It's a generous severance package for your services. And a non-disclosure agreement. You will grant Nate a swift, uncontested divorce and you will vanish." I felt small and powerless, a bug under his magnifying glass. The weight of his wealth and influence felt like a physical force crushing me. But as I looked at his cold, triumphant eyes, something inside me snapped. A fierce, protective anger ignited in my chest. I would not be their silent victim. I would not let them treat me as a disposable asset. I would not let them win. I left his office without taking the document. My first stop was a lawyer, a fierce woman named Sarah Jenkins who specialized in taking on powerful men. My second stop was to find Isabel. It took some digging, but I found her art studio in a bohemian part of the city. I showed up unannounced, the USB drive in my purse. Showing her the evidence was one of the hardest things I've ever done. She was beautiful, with an ethereal quality that made my heart ache. At first she was defensive, protective of Nate. But as she scrolled through the contract, the emails detailing how he was instructed to marry me, the true scope of the deception dawned on her. Her face crumpled. She had believed his stories about a loveless, arranged marriage for business mergers. She never knew the full, dehumanizing truth, or that I was an unwitting, manipulated pawn. The woman I had seen as my rival looked at me with shared horror. "By God," she whispered. "We were both his prisoners." She agreed to give me copies of all her correspondence with Nate, which provided a damning real-time narrative of the entire sordid affair. Armed with this complete, irrefutable dossier, the contract, the emails, the chats with Isabel, the psychological profiles, and a secretly recorded audio file of Richard's threats, I went back to the Carlisle mansion. This time I wasn't a supplicant. I was a prosecutor. I gathered them all in the same living room where we'd spent so many cheerful family evenings. Richard smug and assured, Caroline looking at me with pure venom, Vanessa with her arms crossed in defiance, and Nate who couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't sit down. I stood in the center of the room, the USB drive held up between my thumb and forefinger. "I am not your employee. I am not your incubator. And I am certainly not your victim anymore," I began, my voice ringing with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. You have 3 options and you will decide now. I laid out their fate. Option 1. I take this entire dossier to the financial press, the social media, and every one of your business rivals. I will detail how the Carlyle empire is built on a foundation of criminal money and propped up by human trafficking in the form of a fraudulent marriage. Your social standing will be obliterated. Your business partners will flee. The scandal will be so immense, it will make front-page news for weeks. Option 2. I file a lawsuit so vast it will take your team of lawyers years to untangle. Fraud, coercion, intentional infliction of emotional distress, invasion of privacy. The discovery process will be a public autopsy of your family's rotten core. Every secret, every lie will be exposed in a court of law. Option 3, I said, looking each of them in the eye, letting the silence hang heavy in the opulent room. You give me exactly what I want. Nate and I get an immediate, uncontested divorce. You waive all rights to any and all claims. Furthermore, you will sign over to me, free and clear, the deed to the waterfront penthouse apartment you own in the Millennium Tower. I named the most valuable property in their investment portfolio, a symbol of their status. Its value will secure my future, which you so carelessly gambled with. Consider it reparations. Richard started to protest, his face turning purple, but I cut him off. This is not a negotiation. It's restitution. You will also sign a legally binding document, prepared by my lawyer, stating that you will never, under any circumstances, attempt to contact, harass, or discredit me or my family again. You will vanish from my life. In return, I will vanish from yours, and my silence on this matter will be absolute. I saved my final glance for Nate. And you will call Isabel right now in front of me, and you will tell her the complete, unvarnished truth. No more lies. No more excuses. She deserves to know the man she's really waiting for. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Caroline's sharp, indrawn breath. Richard, the master strategist, looked from my resolute face to the USB drive, to his broken son. He knew he was checkmated. His empire, the legacy he had sacrificed his son's happiness to protect, was on the line. The cost of a single penthouse was a pittance in comparison. He gave a single, curt, almost imperceptible nod. We'll have our lawyers draw up the papers, he said, his voice stripped of all its former power. The divorce was finalized with breathtaking speed. The deed to the multi-million-dollar penthouse was transferred into my name. I sold it immediately on the open market, the proceeds allowing me to buy a beautiful sunlight-filled house all my own and to ensure my parents' retirement was not just comfortable but luxurious. I used a portion of the money to start my own interior design firm, a dream I had put on hold, finally free from the gilded cage of the Carlyles. About a year later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Nate had finally found a shred of courage. He had cut all financial ties with his father, married Isabel, and they had moved to New Zealand as far from the Carlyle shadow as they could get. He had sent me one brief email before he left. The subject line was blank. The message was simple: I am so sorry for the person I was forced to be. You were always the strongest of all of us. I hope you find the happiness I stole from you. Be happy. I read it once, felt a distant pang of pity for the pawn he had been, and pressed delete. The Carlyles still exist in their world of wealth and influence, but I know a part of their foundation is permanently cracked. They look at each other and see the reflection of their own corruption and the ghost of the woman who refused to be their commodity. I, on the other hand, wake up every morning in a home that is truly mine, filled with light and my own choices. The air is clean, free from the poison of their deception. They thought they could buy a life and control the future. But in the end, the pawn they had so carefully selected learned the rules of their game, moved across the board and toppled the king. I didn't just win my freedom. I seized my destiny, and in doing so I reclaimed my soul.